hopefully I highlight what I'm driving at, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean that. Kick my dick in the dirt if I'm ever off point. Um, yeah. So this is an example. I'm looking for some pens or a Sharpie to write with. This is an example of kids not thinking for themselves and repeating things on the internet. Both the kids in question usually will fall into the narcissistic camp of reaction videos, pointing at the fucking screen and using somebody else's hard work and or recirculating or circulating our master's propaganda. So let's dance this back for a second. Growing up, okay, how should I put this? I'm banking on you knowing one aspect of this by name. The other aspect of it you may have heard of, but a lot of you probably don't know what it is. Growing up in homeopathic circles back in Santa Fe, New Mexico, this one would come up sometimes. And for years, I had no idea what the fuck it was, how important it is, what it referred to, let alone how it worked. The other one is, and I admit, the other one is this umbrella of bullshit. And it's lumped into everything you could think of in terms of big pharma, Rockefeller Trust funded horse shit, Western medicine, all that stuff. It still applies to the human body, but the way people think of it, the way it's been dressed up, the outline associated with it is a corruption. In both of these examples, the narcissistic reaction video that's going to talk about this, and the thing that most of you guys probably know about, neither of them dish up how this shit works, why this shit is important. So what I'm referring to, because I said Rockefeller Trust, Big Pharma, and things like that, I'm talking about the human body. I'm talking about how you and I function. I want you to also parallel what I'm driving at without telling you everything right away, because I want you to stay with me for a second and think. I want you to think about anybody out there who excitedly does research and or grew up and is a professional researcher, for a law firm or some other bullshit. What I'm driving at is so fucking important. Why don't all of us do this out of the fucking gates? Most likely because we take this for granted. When you're young, you heal, typically speaking, rather quickly. And you get over a lot of things. You aren't set back. The older you get, the worse it gets, depending on how far gone you are, based on not knowing what I'm dancing around. This is very, very important, in other words. Without this, you wouldn't be able to research for that law firm, is my point. You wouldn't be able to carry on and do what you need to do. But you don't hear a lot of people stressing this. You don't have a lot of people out there telling kids that it is important to appreciate this fact now so that it doesn't bite you in the ass later. I want you to take that to heart. So I'm talking about the immune system and I'm talking about the lymphatic system. The immune system and the lymphatic system. And I'll show you the video in a minute, the narcissistic crap. So here, we'll just do this so you have a visual aid. And that's a system. And this is the lymphatic, if phonetics works, system. And like I said, this usually has to do with big pharma and all that crap. And this usually has to do with what people will consider wishy-washy pseudoscience and things like that. Sometimes Eastern medicine, like I said, homeopathic medicine, natural paths, things along those lines. Everything that's fucking frowned on in terms of this. And it's a slippery slope, but this does come up. This is acceptable to talk about at your doctor's office. Granted, they're not going to ask you about your diet or anything that fucking matters. They will talk to you about petroleum-based drugs that they will prescribe you, but they're not going to talk about shit that matters. In this case, the naturopaths, honestly, are doing a very similar thing to Big Pharma, big surprise, at least the one, I dealt with one a while back, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you guys, some of them aren't like this, but instead of actually addressing the issues of how our bodies work, which scares me now because it made me wonder if some of these people do know what they're fucking talking about. They were urging me, and I've seen others do this when I used to work at I used to work in a specialty care hospital, and some of the nursing staff on the side had, they were moonlighting. So sometimes they would close the door and they would do Reiki on people. And off the book, so to speak, off their shift, after hours, they would offer to sell some of these sick and dying people herbs, is the point. Instead of focusing on, let's get you eating healthy food, not what they're serving in this fucking, this death mill. That's exactly what it is. Prison food and hospital food isn't far removed. So, when you think of this, do any of you know what that is? Do you know how that functions? I'm curious. I'm going to play this video, and then I'll come back to what I'm getting at. I want you to appreciate that I've barked at so many kids who are doing things like this, and typically speaking, they will block me. They will not consider their actions. They won't consider what I said, or why I said it, or how it might relate or resonate with who they are and how they are conducting themselves. They'll just block me. It's no different than the kids that tell me, I'm not reading all of that. You wrote more than a sentence. Here's the video. If it works. Let's watch this rot twice. And these two kids are dumber than a fucking bucket of hammers. One more time. We don't have an immune system. We have a lymphatic system. And they're not censored because they're not teaching people shit that reflects reality, typically speaking, and or hasn't been drugged through the mud and corrupted in terms of the propaganda mill. So you got veins, you got arteries having to do with your heart, and you got your lungs, yeah? You got the valve, you got the pump. You got the arteries that are carrying the shit away, you got the veins that are bringing it to your heart. It's part of this. It's all related to this, because without that, you wouldn't have this. It's a symbiotic system. It's interconnected. You also have, if you got a person here and they're facing you, and if I'm not wrong, you got a liver on this side. And don't forget, you got kidneys. You got two of them. And yeah, I'm talking about organs here. If this works with one hand. But this shit is the immune system. The lymphatic system has to do with snot. It has to do with mucus. And that is all subject to inflammation. The more inflammation, the more mucus. The more inflammation and mucus, the worse your odds are. And it's also a telltale sign that your diet is shit. You're eating shit. You are not healthy. You're not doing well. Which means that's going to corrupt your gut. And I need a different fucking Sharpie because this worked out really well. Let's see, we got a big one. Let's see if this works. Your gut's what determines fucking everything. Everything. You gum that up, and you gotta really appreciate how long will it take you to ungum this process? How long will it take you to reverse fucking this up? Your small and your large intestines. If that's full of fucking undigested rot, it's going to come out in your skin. It's going to fuck you up. It's going to fuck you up. And that means that your lymphatic system is moving very slow and or not moving at all. If you've got a runny nose, you got all that crap. You got a lot of drainage. You get headaches. It's not a good sign. It means you need to get that shit moving. And that's all subject to your liver, which will grow back, but you have to start doing the right things, which means you need to stop stressing your body out, which means you probably should work on intermittent fasting, depending on how healthy you are. And that's a slippery slope, and you got to figure that out on your own. But this comes down to both your kidneys. One might be weaker than the other. Think about it. Testicles, one's usually larger than the other. Same with breasts. Same has to do with how you eat, what you eat, and how it impacts each of your kidneys. If you've ever drank alcohol in your life, one of them is probably weaker than the other. Simple as that. Now, if these things aren't working well, this isn't draining, this is all gummed up, you're not doing well. That is your immune system being fucked up. Now, these kids were saying the immune system doesn't exist, and the only fucking thing they point at in that video with their narcissistic reaction, horse shit, because they're dumber than what? I said a bucket of hammers earlier. How about a basket of marbles? There's a lot more that needs to go on. There's a lot more that needs to be discussed, and these things aren't stressed. People aren't taught these things. Before I started whining on the internet today, how many of you knew what a lymphatic system is? How many of you understood how it worked? And this is just my shitty presentation. There's more to this, of course. I mean, you got a pancreas and you got a bunch of other stuff going on. All your organs factor into this. And all that relates to the wandering stars, as crazy as that will probably sound to people. And yet, you have kids who will squeal, cymatics! You got kids out there saying, I'm non-binary, but here's a toroidal field I'd like to talk to you about. I'm really into how magnets work. Doesn't make any fucking sense. I love when a non-binary person, and what I'm saying here is kids who will repeat anything, and this is relevant because it's a big fucking deal, but somebody who's non-binary who works the night shift. Knowing the jargon is half the fucking battle. I reached a point, I forget when, within the last couple years, to where I couldn't sleep at night. It was so fucking bad. That's how far I pushed things. For whatever reasons, all the excuses people have. I've since fasted and what have you. Now my nose almost never runs. You really just got to clean up your body. I mean, people say the body's the temple, and it is. It's a reflection of that. I'm not talking about the flat earth or the globe theory, because both of those are bullshit. That are our master's outlines, and most people haven't figured that out. Try applying the human form to both of those. You can't use them as a tool because they don't reflect reality. But back to point. This is one of the many things you probably should be familiar with. Katarara. I urge you to appreciate that there are many moving pieces. You can simplify it. This is why I say snot, inflammation, what have you, having to do with nodes and all that other junk. It's the negative side is how people would think of it. It's the ramifications of your lymphatic system not being in working order based on a poor diet. Granted, I've heard cases where people, they suffer, how should I explain it? Have you ever heard of somebody who jumps out of a plane, their chute doesn't pull and they hit the ground? Or somebody who was in a car wreck, things like that. When your form is damaged, it's going to trip up the inner workings as well. And that will jar your lymphatic system. It's something that doesn't come up, but it should come up. To that point, you could think of, and this is jargon that's thrown around these days, and I mention it every now and again, even though this guy promotes propaganda too here and there. His name's Ibrahim Karim, and what he shops around, they refer to it as biogeometry. It's just as good as the kids squealing cymatics, but there is a power, there's a resonance to form, having to do with our 5-petal form. And if it's damaged, it will damage all the aspects of our 5-petal form and what maintains this, how it hums, how it is in tune with the realm otherwise. Another way to appreciate it, when you go in, and if you go in for an elective surgery, this is why people say never go in for an elective surgery, because you could die on the fucking table. If things are out of hand, here, let me think, I'll tell you a couple different things. So I have a hernia currently, but I had high blood pressure. I had all this crap with my lymphatic system and a number of other things that were not addressed when I went to a urologist and had them checking out all my junk. And they said, yeah, we can fix that hernia, lickety split. So I asked them, what about all of these other factors? Oh, don't worry, we'll figure that out. So fairly recently, and that was almost a year ago, or maybe 6 months ago. I'm like a time traveler either way, back to point. It was a while ago. I went and saw another doctor recently, asked him, so, hey, are you going to address any of these issues? And he's like, no, we'll just do the surgery. And I was like, okay. And then he said, and if there's any complications, with your testicle, we'll just cut one off. And I told him, fuck that. That's exactly what I told him. Because these guys are whack jobs. They're hack jobs. It's a joke. It is a fucking joke. It's just a business to make money. They're not in it to truly work on what's what. So what I was getting at with elective surgeries, most people don't think that any of this exists. And even though you have some kids who will wax poetic about an aura and all that junk, you got a skeletal antenna. You got a skeleton. And this is part of what facilitates in terms of an antenna, having to do with this 5-petal form and how the light pours through you, related to something known as the ether. It's also known as chi, prana, vril, etherions. It's got a lot of fucking names. Do appreciate the Vril Society? Didn't exist. But people know vril, having to do with usually Aryans and Nazis and bullshit. Aryans technically has to do with Indians, Hindus, dots, not feathers. Not white people who come from imaginary bullshit, which is what most people think of these days because it's all been corrupted. Chi, vril, etherions, ether. And ether is a relatively new term. You could think of a battery if you think of how you and I work. And you should think of a toroidal field. You should think of how heat rises, and usually my mnemonic device is frost falls. These two things work in tandem, and this is how this is flowing through your body. Now, if your body, again, biogeometry, if your 5-petal form is damaged in an elective surgery where they cut into you with a scalpel, this is why people get infections, because you have tripped up that field of energy. This has to do with technically magnetism and electricity, even though you'll hear a lot of polarizing bullshit having to do with the electric universe, where we disregard the other principle, the other crucial principle of reality that is facilitating this, and in turn, they maintain one another, yin and fucking yang, because it's a binary system. This is also why that aspect of reality is currently under attack, and most people are supporting the fucking propaganda instead of thinking for themselves. There's a lot more to this, and this is my bargain bin version. I used to speak at length about the chakras and all this other crap, things that people don't know. They do not know. I've asked so many kids in the esoteric circles, the occult circles, which a lot of kids don't even understand that it just means hidden. And what they're talking about isn't hidden. It's the superficial shit that our masters left online, which means it's not esoteric. It's not occult by definition. It's spoon-fed propaganda for brain-dead Muppets. To repeat, what was I going to say to that? Oh, I've asked these kids in these circles what a certain sigil, a symbol, an icon, a particular one that I know you've seen, I know you've heard about. And I've asked them, what is this? What does it represent? And the only things that they can dish up, because people are just jerking each other off. They don't have a clue what's going on because they have not, just like I began this with, they haven't taken the time to try to appreciate how they work, why their bodies work the way they do, etc., etc. If you did that, then you wouldn't buy into the flat earth and the globe theory shit. Because that shit doesn't stick. Doesn't make any sense. None. But people don't do this. The same applies to what these kids were answering the question with, or attempting to. They'd say things like, Merkaba, it's an icosahedron, it's this, that, and the other thing. And I mean, superficially, you've heard of the compass and the square, right? You've heard of Masonic bullshit. And you've probably heard of Dan Brown if you were around during that time when his books became, cinematic adaptations starring a pedophile, otherwise known as Tom Hanks. Um, the Blade and the Chalice, an upright pyramid and an inverted pyramid, or an upright triangle and an inverted triangle, a dick and a pussy, fire and water. This is also why I said a moment ago having to do with the skeletal antenna. What is it? The smoke or the fire, what have you, the heat rises, and usually I say the mnemonic device, frost falls and sticks to the ground. This is how these toroidal fields work. This is how this works. This is in reference to the ether that is pouring through our skeletal fucking antenna, because this is something that is irrefutable, but most people will deny it. Most people will, they'll argue trying to use our master's propaganda. They'll talk at you having to do with paradigms instead of using the gray matter between their ears. It's insane. But this is also why people have been duped into the other thing that I was complaining about. It's a social engineering agenda related to the Tavistock Institute. And it is important, but you would have to think about it to appreciate that. I'm talking about people claiming that they're non-binary, which would mean that they don't exist. They would not exist if they were not binary. It doesn't make any sense. Usually I joke around. If you eat food and you take a shit, since I was talking about, your small and your large intestines, your mouth is connected to your asshole. If you eat food and you take a shit, those are two different states. That means you're a binary fucking creature. If you're awake right now, that means you're not asleep. Because, Schrodinger's cat, are you and I alive and dead at the same time? Well, but technically you and I are awake if you're hearing this. You're not asleep. Two different states, motherfucker. Binary. It's ones and zeros. That's how your computer works. Computers are based on, at least that fundamental principle of computers is based on how reality works. That's how our masters re-engineered or rediscovered this means of, the silicon chips and Silicon Valley and blah, 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 all that other garbage. It's simply how it works. You got guys and gals. How do you think a fucking baby is made? With two non-binary kids who don't exist, so they can't make a baby that exists because they don't fucking exist. And they're thinking of themselves as inanimate objects because our master's goal, and this might sound wildly crazy to you, but it's to merge man with machine and do away with free will. That's where this is all going. This is why you and I have a debit card and why we've been trained to ask people when you go to the register, do I use my chip? This is why you and I are carrying around a cell phone. And this bleeds into a bunch of other rants. All of these things are interconnected. All of these things are terribly important, but people don't want to think about any of this. They don't want to hear it. They just want to play a mean game of make-believe and continue the fuck shit up. All right, I'll digress. As always, what the fuck do I know? If you sat through this, thanks for hearing me out. I appreciate your time and energy. I do. Despite the fact that most people will just say, oh my God, he's not shopping around polarizing positive vibes only and promoting censorship. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kurt Cameron. And I just typed prick up your ears on InShot. When somebody decided to give me a popular reaction, well, I guess it's a little different, but they did chime in without thinking about what I said. So he said, in reference to Kurt Cameron, and Kurt Cameron's just saying that drugs are bad. And they are. They're not good for your system, by and large. Most. Some might expand your mind, open your mind. Either way, back to point. He said, nutty right-winger. And yeah, in some ways, sure. But that's not the point. So I said the Republic fell during the Civil War and was finalized in 1871. That's when the Organic Act established the District of Columbia, which is the bottom of the trilateral city-states. This is a big fucking deal. It's when America became a corporation in all capital letters. I said it hasn't been for the people, by the people in a very long time. Your polarizing propaganda is noted. The last line in particular is what should have resonated with this fucking Muppet. But it didn't. Instead, they wrote me back. And they tried to prove their point with our master's propaganda, which is essentially reaffirming that he's a right-wing nutbag. Who fucking cares? It's still polarizing propaganda. And if you appreciate that the republic fell a very long time ago and is not for the people, by the people, it's democracy, which is a shade of fascism, which I didn't spell out for them because I didn't think for them, means what he left on here is garbage. It's not something that benefits you and I. It promotes and reaffirms, I should say, it reaffirms our master's official narrative. It reaffirms this shade of fascism. It reaffirms this phony jurisdiction of voting matters and all that other garbage in place to subjugate us, to mislead and manipulate people, and by degrees subjugate us. Whoever this is, they're fucking people up, and 3 other Muppets clicked like on there. But then again, this kid bought into the pronoun game because he's thinking for himself. That's why I see 4, 5 social engineering stickers in here. Because this is a well-meaning and capable adult who is using free will and critical thought to analyze and interpret. Once again, what the fuck do I know? To answer that question, you and I are surrounded by people who are well below average and fucking everything up. Typically speaking, it's less than encouraging when people contact me online. And I know that sounds condescending, that sounds pretentious as fuck, but it is absolutely true. All you got to do is, that's why I keep showing you guys examples of people day to day that interact with me. And if I don't show you the interactions and you were somebody who has interacted with me, that's a good sign. That's a really good sign. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. All right, so here's a post, and this gal just chimed in. Well, apparently we can't do that. So I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to crop out the fucking audio, because there should be a way to do that. This is for me. Beginning now, asshole. I guess it did work. Instagram. Maybe it's me. This gal isn't the worst one online, but she does just post superficial shit most of the time. Share this. Now, here's what I left on here, because it's absolutely fucking pointless what she left on here. This is mostly a run-on sentence, but I said, ice cream is horrible for you. Corporate cereals are awful on the body. Gatorade is poison. White bread is the worst possible choice you could make in terms of quote-unquote bread. Why did you post this? It's pointless. Honestly, think about it. Just fucking think about it. There's Hershey syrup in there as well. She didn't point out a fucking thing. I mean, some people out there are talking about some of the fruit codes and what have you. 9 is supposedly or allegedly organic. So why are any of the other codes sold in a grocery store if it's poison? But you don't hear people bring that up. Not that point, at least. Why do most grocery aisles contain, or I should say most grocery stores, they'll contain an aisle of food opposite cleaning products? That's by design, not by coincidence. And that's absolutely fucking deplorable. That shit's leaching into the containers of food based on proximity. And you do not hear people bringing that up. And that's also standards and practices, or the lack thereof in this case, that should not and would not exist if you and I were surrounded by people thinking for themselves. But that is clearly not the case. So this gal contacted me. Where is it now? It's right here. It's hidden because you have to hide these things. So you have to click on extra steps to jar your brain and retrain how we think so that we do not think critically. The quickest, the quickest line, or how should I say? How does it go? Now I'm fucking deadpanning. If you're trying to get from A to B, the quickest line would be from A to B. You wouldn't want to go to C. And that was the worst way I could possibly deliver that. And I understand, and I hope it's laughable. I've only eaten one thing today. That's been my complaint lately. Because, yeah, I haven't been eating much. Back to point. She said, not everyone knows. Just think about it. Ice cream is full of fucking sugar. Cereal is full of fucking sugar. Gatorade is full of fucking sugar. White bread is full of fucking sugar. If parents, if you and I, this goes back to everything I've said in this video, if you and I took the time to try to figure out how shit works and why it's important to understand how it fucking works when you and I become adults and possibly become parents, we would impart that knowledge to children, which means you and I would be benefiting one another by example and by degrees, and things would get better. Things would be harmonious. In stark contrast to what we see trending, which is a downward trajectory. It's a slippery slope and an absolute fucking dog shit slush pile. It's not going well, and things are not going to turn around on their own and get better. Because you and I are surrounded by what? Most people are well below average, and what? What do I keep saying? This isn't the best analogy, but yes, kittens are cute, but these kids are dumber than a house full of kittens.